For those of you unaware, Xenogears, a god-slaying story, recently received an English translation by yours truly. It's a prequel novel set in the same world, taking place 3 years before. It was not written by anyone on the dev team, but rather a novelist who worked on other niche mecha novels during the time, including a series based on a TTRPG called Where's Blade, if any of you are familiar with that. Despite the fact that the book wasn't written by anyone on the dev team, they were definitely working alongside them to some degree. The book was released in April of 1998, just 2 months after the game released. While it does take place in mostly various desert locations, the town of Priz appears, which is never mentioned in the base game, and only in Perfect Works, which wouldn't come out until August of that year. Seeing as this was pretty much the last bit of official untranslated media relating to Xenogears, and seeing as that I had the book in my collection, I decided that I wanted to translate it, half for the benefit of the community, and half to improve my own Japanese. During the year it took me to finish this project, I wanted to ensure that this would all be future-proofed, and so in addition to translating the book, I decided to transcribe the entirety of it as well. This way, future translation projects will have easy access to the entire Japanese script of the book in a pastable form. I will leave a link to that, as well as, of course, the finished English translation in the description below. Now, I also want to discuss whether this book is canon or not. It has been widely assumed to be non-canon by the community, though having translated it and looked into Perfect Works, I actually think it might be canon. As mentioned before, the authors were working alongside the dev team to some level, though to the extent of that we don't know. That said, I do want to go into the details of the book and explain how it fits within the canon, so if you haven't read it yet and don't want to be spoiled, feel free to come back later. The book isn't too long. For those of you who wish to proceed, you have been warned. Alpha Veltal was the first thing I was concerned about with this book, as it's found within some ruins by the protagonists. I personally had assumed that Graf was just using the gear for the last 500 years, though that is actually incorrect. Looking to page 16 of Perfect Works in the timeline, it actually turns out that Alpha Velta was placed in suspended animation by Roni, Renee, and the other members of that party 500 years ago. This actually does line up with how the gear is discovered within some ancient ruins from 500 years ago, placed in suspended animation. Considering Phase Veltal was built based on Alpha Veltal, that means that it must have been built within the last 3 years. This actually does go to explain why it is seen without a gear during the quelling of Elul. Graf simply didn't have the original to build the replica after until Fate was already located in Lahan and it was sealed away. Moving on from that, the next thing I wanted to talk about was Priz in a little bit more detail. We have basically no information on the town. Base game doesn't mention it a single time, and in Perfect Works it's only mentioned by name. It's shown on the map so we know where it is located, and we have an elevation given, but other than that, the only other mention in Perfect Works is in the glossary in the back. That's all to say that there is no canon here to conflict with. Considering there are 4 months between this book's release and Perfect Works, there is a chance that it was added to Perfect Works and created by the authors, though again, we really don't have enough information to go off of. It very well might have been in an earlier draft of the game by Takahashi. After all, Perfect Works does contain a lot of information that was written by Saga after the game's release, including details on Noln and the whole Sigurd's family. The final bit of canon I wanted to clarify was about nanomachines. There is talk about nanomachines, specifically very small ones, so I wanted to double check that. It is mentioned on Emeralda's page in Perfect Works that Krellin was only able to create nanomachines many times larger than the ones that she had in her body. And of course, considering this takes place 3 years before the game, that means that he would still be using these larger ones. That said, I do think it does still align with the canon. Even in their larger form, Krellin is able to administer these nanomachines via food and alter people's DNA. The nanomachines discussed in this book are effectively an earlier version of the nanomachines he releases at the end of Disc 1, those being the ones that convert all the humans into the Vels. This is definitely the weakest point in the book lining up with the canon, though I do think it is still strong enough to say that it is. In terms of canon hierarchy, at the top we would have Perfect Works and base game. Beneath that we would have additional materials by the original writers, such as Liquid Sky, which was written by Soraya Saga. Beneath that is where I think this book places. It contains canon materials, doesn't conflict with anything, and was clearly developed alongside the game to some level. Then, finally, beneath this book we would have the other manga anthologies, which aren't really canon, though they don't really conflict either. That is all to say that this book is in fact canon, contrary to what we had previously believed. Make sure to let me know what you thought of the book in a comment below. I'm really interested to see everyone's takes on it. And of course, thank you for listening to me ramble about this book, and thank you for checking out the translation of the book I did. I really do appreciate that as well. If you do have any questions about the translation or anything regarding it, please feel free to ask me those. I'm more than happy to answer. Anyway, that's all for this video. Have a good one.